Aaron Coker stood still on the marble balcony of the Coker estate, his hands gripping the cold metal railing as the Lagos breeze brushed against his face. The city below pulsed with life, horns blaring, voices rising in song, laughter, and protest. All of it reminded him of everything he was about to lose. The doctor's words echoed like a cruel drumbeat in his mind. 3 months, Aaron. Maybe less. Without a transplant, you won't make it. But Aaron didn't want to steal time from someone else. The very thought of someone dying so he could live turned his stomach. Inside the house, the buzz of a silent war brewed. His mother had summoned bishops, herbalists, even a renowned fertility specialist. His father paced the hallways, clinging to hope like it was a threadbare coat. Everyone had a plan for how he should survive: surrogacy, black market hearts, and miracle pills, but none of them felt right. So, Aaron had chosen to live what little time he had left with dignity. No desperate measures. No surrogate children just to keep the Coker name alive. No lies. And that's why he ended things with Bianca. Bianca, with her flawless beauty and fierce ambition, had taken the news like a slap to the face. Her infertility was already a wound, one she barely spoke of. Aaron's decision to break things off, just days after her tearful confession, had shattered what was left of them. "So I'm not even good enough to watch you die," she'd spat before slamming the door. He hadn't answered. The truth was, he didn't want anyone to watch him with her. Least of all someone who had already lost so much. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with Aaron Coker yet. Not by a long shot. Ifunaya balanced a basin of clothes on her head as she walked past the Coker estate gates, her chin held high despite the weight. Her mother's voice still rang in her ears: "You will marry Chief Ozo next week, whether you like it or not." It had taken all her courage to run from the house that morning, her mind spinning with fear and fury. Chief Ozo was older than her father had been. Widowed 3 times, with whispers of each wife's mysterious death trailing behind him like a funeral dirge. Ifunaya would rather scrub toilets for the rest of her life than be one of his brides. She paused at the gates, peering inside like she had done 100 times before as a child. Her father had been the Coker's loyal driver for over 2 decades. He used to bring her here on weekends when she was little. While he washed the car, she would sit with young Master Aaron under the mango tree, sharing puff-puff and childish dreams. That was before her father died in a car accident 3 years ago, and the visit stopped. Still, she remembered Aaron, quiet, kind, with eyes that always seemed to be searching for something he couldn't name. She didn't expect to see him walking through the gardens that afternoon, or for him to stop mid-step when he saw her. He looked thinner, paler than she remembered, like a ghost of himself. But his eyes lit up, just briefly, and that flicker of recognition made her blink. "Ifunaya," he asked, stepping closer. "What are you doing here?" "Running," she replied, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "And I have nowhere else to go." Aaron stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he opened the gate. Aaron led Ifunaya through the garden path, guiding her toward the guest house tucked behind the estate's main building. The walk was quiet, save for the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the distant chirp of birds settling in the trees. Aaron hadn't planned to see anyone today, let alone the daughter of his late driver, the only man, apart from his doctor, who had ever treated him like a human and not a legacy. Inside the modest guest house, Aaron poured her a glass of water while she looked around, clearly overwhelmed. The place smelled of cedarwood and lemon polish, clean, untouched, almost sterile. Ifunaya stood stiffly, her arms crossed, still unsure if she had done the right thing by coming here. She had nowhere else to go, but she also didn't want to be a burden. "You can stay here," Aaron said at last, breaking the silence. "Just until you figure things out." Ifunaya hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" Aaron paused, leaning against the doorway. "Because your father once saved my life. He pulled me from a burning car when I was 10. Broke his arm doing it." She swallowed hard. She remembered that story. Her father had come home with a cast and a story about duty and courage. But hearing it now, from Aaron, made her eyes sting. "Thank you," she whispered. Aaron nodded, but the shadows under his eyes deepened. As he turned to leave, Ifunaya finally asked, "Why do you look like someone who's already given up?" He stopped. Because I have 3 months to live. The words hung heavy in the air. Ifunaya's breath caught. She hadn't expected that answer. And yet, somehow, she knew this was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. The next morning, Aaron awoke to the scent of frying plantains wafting through the open windows. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. No one had cooked in the estate since the housekeeper took a leave of absence. He rose slowly, his chest tight with the usual ache, and followed the smell to the guest house kitchen. There stood Ifunaya, her hair tied in a scarf, flipping golden slices of plantain with a grace that belied her inner turmoil. "You're up," she said, offering him a hesitant smile. "I never sleep for long," he replied, then nodded toward the frying pan. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," she said simply, "but I wanted to. I needed to feel useful." He sat at the table, watching her move. There was something grounding about her presence, familiar, yet different. She had grown. The girl who used to sneak extra meat into his plate was now a woman who'd run from everything to preserve her dignity. They ate in silence until Aaron's phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Bianca is back. We must talk. Your legacy cannot die with you." Aaron sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Ifunaya glanced at him. "Everything okay?" "No," he admitted. Then, almost without thinking, he looked up at her and said, "Would you consider pretending to be my wife?" The words fell out before he could catch them. "What?" she blinked, startled. "My parents won't stop pushing marriage, children, legacy. If you pretend to be my wife, they'll back off. And you have a safe place to stay, no more threats of forced marriages." Ifunaya stared at him, caught between disbelief and intrigue. "You want a fake marriage?" Aaron nodded. "Just until the end." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, she said, "Okay. I'll do it." The Coca estate had never been so quiet. The house staff whispered in corners, rumors buzzing like flies. When Aaron entered the main house with Ifunaya by his side, every eye followed them. She wore a simple lavender gown that hugged her modestly, her hair in loose curls. Aaron's mother, Lady Evelyn Coca, rose from her seat like a queen on trial, eyes narrowing the moment she saw them hand in hand. "Aaron," she said slowly, "who is this?" "My wife," he replied evenly, squeezing Ifunaya's fingers for reassurance. The silence was electric. Lady Evelyn's lips parted slightly, and then tightened into a line. "I see." Ifunaya gave a small bow. "Good afternoon, Ma. My name is Ifunaya. My father once worked for your family." "Oh, I remember him," Lady Evelyn said, the smile on her lips not reaching her eyes. "He was loyal. Too loyal." Aaron stepped in before the tension could snap. "We had a quiet ceremony in Abuja. We didn't want anything extravagant. Given everything." Lady Evelyn blinked, then turned her sharp gaze to her son. "And Bianca?" "I ended things with Bianca," Aaron said simply. "She deserves more than waiting for someone who's dying." The word silenced everyone again. Ifunaya's fingers twitched in his. She could feel the tremor in his voice, the pain hidden beneath the composure. This wasn't just for show, it was Aaron's way of reclaiming control in a world determined to script his last chapter. Later that evening, in the quiet of the guest house, Aaron handed her a delicate gold ring. "You don't have to wear it all the time," he said. "Just when the vultures are around." Ifunaya slid the ring on her finger, staring at the small, simple band. "It may be fake," she said, "but it still feels heavy." Aaron met her eyes. Everything real eventually starts with something fake. Days passed, and the estate slowly adjusted to the news of Aaron's sudden marriage. Gossip brewed among the staff like hot tea, whispers about the driver's daughter, speculations about inheritance, and whether Aaron's decision was made from love or desperation. Ifunaya kept her head down, but she heard it all. Every whisper, every stare, every quiet judgment. But she wasn't here to win hearts, she was here to survive. And maybe, just maybe, help Aaron survive a little longer too. In the quiet hours of the night, Aaron sat on the veranda, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. His breath came in shallow waves. He was losing weight fast now, and the dark circles under his eyes deepened each day. Ifunaya joined him silently, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked softly. "All the time," he murmured, staring into the darkness. "Sometimes it feels closer than the present. I remember you used to sneak my father's suyo behind your mom's back," she smiled faintly. He'd pretend not to know where it came from. Aaron chuckled, his first genuine laugh in days. "And your father once told me I'd never survive a day in Ajugono." "You wouldn't," she teased. His laughter faded, replaced by a pained smile. "He told me once that he prayed I'd grow up with heart, not just wealth. Maybe he cursed me instead." Ifunaya turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "You weren't cursed. You just got the kind of heart that feels everything too deeply." For a long moment, they sat there, two souls from different worlds, bound by secrets, loss, and now a lie that was starting to blur into truth. Aaron looked at her and whispered, "I don't want to die angry. Or alone." "You're not alone," she said. And for once, he believed her. The knock on the door came just after breakfast. It was soft, measured, but carried the kind of weight that made Aaron's stomach twist. Ifunaya was clearing the dishes when she paused, glancing at him. "Expecting anyone?" she asked. "No," Aaron replied. When he opened the door, there stood Bianca, flawless as always, draped in a fitted navy dress and sunglasses that barely hid the fire in her eyes. Behind her, a driver waited by a sleek black car. She removed her glasses slowly and gave Aaron a long, unreadable look before letting her gaze drift to Ifunaya. "So it's true," she said coolly. "You replaced me with her." Aaron straightened. "This isn't the time or place." Bianca stepped forward, uninvited. "I gave you 3 years of my life, Aaron. And because I can't give you a child, you throw me away for a convenient lie." Ifunaya's shoulders stiffened, but she said nothing. Aaron stepped between them. "It wasn't about the child. It was about me. I didn't want you to waste your life mourning someone who's already halfway gone." Bianca's eyes welled up, but she didn't let a tear fall. "You think leaving me was noble? It was cruel. You didn't even let me choose." He didn't have a reply. She turned her gaze to Ifunaya. "You're a pawn in his pity game. Don't mistake this ring for love." With that, she walked out, heels echoing down the marble hallway. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ifunaya turned to Aaron, voice low. "Do you still love her?" He hesitated. "I don't know. But I know this, when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm dying." And that truth, raw and unexpected, shook them both more than Bianca's visit ever could. The sun filtered through the mango trees as Ifunaya knelt in the garden, her hands deep in the soil. It had become her morning ritual: dig, plant, breathe. Aaron had mentioned once that he missed the garden his grandmother used to tend, so she'd taken it upon herself to revive it. There was something healing in the dirt, something steady. And in a life filled with so many unknowns, that steadiness was gold. Aaron watched her from the window, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't realized how much peace he had lost, until he saw her bring some of it back. Gone were the sharp-edged silences of a house that once echoed with pressure and expectation. With Ifunaya around, it was filled with soft sounds, humming, laughter, and even the rustling of pages when she read by the fireplace at night. Later that afternoon, Aaron joined her outside, a blanket draped over his shoulders. She looked up, brushing hair from her face. "You shouldn't be out without a jacket." He shrugged. "Couldn't resist watching you turn weeds into something beautiful." She rolled her eyes playfully. "Flattery won't save you from weeding duty." They walked side by side, the silence between them now companionable. As she handed him a small potted hibiscus, he asked, "Why are you really doing this?" "Not just the garden, all of it." She paused. "Because I know what it feels like to be trapped, to have people make decisions for you. You gave me a way out. Now I want to help you feel alive, at least for as long as this heart still beats." Aaron looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time, he didn't see a girl running from her past. He saw a woman strong enough to stand beside him, even when everything else was falling apart. Dinner that night was an affair. Lady Evelyn had personally requested a formal family meal, summoning Aaron and his wife to dine with her, his father Chief Roland Coker, and a few extended relatives. The grand dining hall shimmered under the golden chandelier, but the tension was thick enough to slice with a steak knife. Ifunaya sat beside Aaron, dressed in a soft cream blouse and a long skirt, simple but elegant. She kept her back straight and her eyes low, aware of every gaze on her. Chief Roland eyed her with mild curiosity, his salt and pepper beard twitching as he swallowed a glass of wine. He hadn't spoken a word to her since they arrived. "Tell me, Ifunaya," Lady Evelyn said, lifting her fork, "what exactly do you do? Besides marrying my son, of course." Aaron's hand tensed under the table. Ifunaya answered calmly, "I studied catering and events. I help manage a small food business in Oja. Or I used to, before recent events." "Catering," Lady Evelyn repeated, as if tasting something sour. "Well, I suppose even a family as old as ours must modernize." Aaron cleared his throat. "Mom." But Ifunaya smiled gently. "It's not the title that matters, Ma. It's the heart behind the work." Chief Roland finally spoke. "That's an interesting answer." He leaned in, voice low and deliberate. "Tell me, dear, what made you marry a man you know is dying?" The entire room stilled. Aaron started to speak, but Ifunaya gently placed her hand over his. Her voice was calm. "Because dying or not, he's still more of a man than most people who are fully alive." The silence was deafening, until Chief Roland let out a single, quiet chuckle and returned to his meal. Later, as they walked back to the guest house under the night sky, Aaron whispered, "You didn't have to defend me like that." "I didn't do it for you," she said, with a soft smile. "I did it for us." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and false hope. Aaron sat in a reclining chair, his shirt unbuttoned halfway, as the cardiologist prepped him for another round of tests. Electrodes were attached to his chest, cold against his skin, while the monitor beside him blinked like a silent countdown. Ifunaya stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching every movement. She hated hospitals. The sterile walls, the buzz of machines, the way doctors spoke in hushed voices like grief was contagious. But Aaron had asked her to come, and she couldn't say no. Not anymore. Dr. Morrow, the family's longtime cardiologist, scanned the results with tired eyes. "Your heart is weakening, Aaron. The arrhythmias are increasing. We may need to admit you sooner than planned." Aaron's face didn't flinch. "How long do I have left if I don't get the transplant?" Dr. Morrow looked at him, then at Ifunaya, as though weighing how much truth the room could handle. "A few weeks, maybe less. The heart can't carry the load anymore." Ifunaya felt something cold wash over her. She stepped forward. "There's still no donor." "None that are viable," Dr. Morrow said. "He's on the list, but the match has to be perfect." They drove back in silence. Aaron leaned his head against the car window, watching the world blur past. "It's strange," he murmured, "how something as small as a heart can decide whether you live or die." Ifunaya reached across and placed her hand over his. "Your heart may be weak, Aaron. But you're not." He looked at her then, really looked. Her strength wasn't loud or flashy, it was rooted, quiet, the kind that could carry another soul when their legs gave out. "Promise me something," he said softly. "Don't let them bury me before I'm gone." She squeezed his hand. "You're not gone. Not yet." The days that followed Aaron's doctor visit felt like a blur. The air in the estate grew thicker, as though the walls themselves knew how close they were to losing him. Aaron's health continued to decline, his breath shorter, his movements slower. The once vibrant man who had commanded the attention of any room now spent most of his time lying in bed, the pulse of life slowly dimming under the weight of his condition. Ifunaya did her best to keep the house running smoothly, but there was only so much she could do. She tended to Aaron's meals, made sure he took his medication, but it wasn't enough. The dark circles under his eyes deepened with each passing day, his once strong frame now a shell of its former self. One evening, after dinner, Aaron sat at the edge of the bed, staring out the window. The last light of the day was fading into the horizon, casting the room in shades of deep purple and orange. Ifunaya stood at the doorway, watching him, unsure if she should intrude. "Are you okay, she asked, her voice soft. Aaron didn't respond at first, just continued staring out into the distance. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm tired, Ifunaya. I'm so tired. She walked over to him, kneeling in front of him so their eyes were level. You're allowed to be tired, Aaron. You've been fighting for so long. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything's fine, he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. I can't keep fighting a battle I know I'm losing. Tears welled up in Ifunaya's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly, refusing to let him see her break. She placed a gentle hand on his, her touch grounding him. You're not alone in this fight, Aaron. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something more, a depth that both terrified and comforted him. You've done so much already. I've done nothing, she replied, shaking her head. You've done everything. You've been strong. You've kept going, even when you didn't have to. Aaron let out a small, bitter laugh. If only it were enough. For the first time, Ifunaya saw him, really saw him, in all his vulnerability. The man who had always been proud, stoic, now faced the reality of his own mortality. And it broke something inside her. Maybe it's not about being enough, she said softly, her voice trembling. Maybe it's about being here. With the people who love you. Maybe that's enough. Aaron's eyes searched hers for a long moment, as though he was trying to decide if he could believe her. Finally, he nodded, the faintest of smiles tugging at his lips. Maybe. They sat there in silence, the weight of the unspoken hanging between them. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, they felt like they were facing it together. The days were becoming increasingly difficult for Aaron. The long bouts of pain that had once been a rare occurrence were now a constant companion, dragging him into dark corners of his mind where fear and regret played their cruel games. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a full night of sleep, and his appetite had all but disappeared. Yet, through it all, Ifunaya remained by his side, steadfast, patient, and unwavering in a way that reminded him of the love that had long since slipped through his fingers. It was in the quiet moments, when the world outside felt distant and forgotten, that Aaron found himself holding on. Ifunaya's gentle hands, the soft hum of her voice when she spoke, the warmth of her presence, it was these small things that kept him tethered to the present, kept him from slipping into despair. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Ifunaya sat beside him on the veranda, a warm cup of tea in her hands. He had been staring out into the horizon for what felt like hours, lost in the beauty of the sunset that mirrored his inner turmoil. Do you remember, Ifunaya said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence, the first time we met? Aaron blinked, the memory pulling him back in time. I was about to fire your father, he said, the corner of his lips lifting slightly in amusement. Ifunaya smiled, the light in her eyes soft and nostalgic. You were a horrible boss. I wasn't trying to be, Aaron replied, his tone light but heavy with the truth. I didn't understand him. I didn't understand any of it. If you'd listened, you might have understood more than you think, she said softly, eyes meeting his. The conversation hung between them for a moment. The past, the mistakes, the misunderstandings, they all seemed so distant now, like pages of a book he had long since closed. And yet, here they were, two people brought together by fate's cruel hand, and yet, somehow, finding something in each other that transcended all of it. Ifunaya put her cup down, her fingers brushing against Aaron's. I used to think the world was full of chaos, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But maybe it's just full of moments like this. Moments of grace, where everything comes together. Aaron turned to look at her, the weight of her words sinking deep into his heart. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe all we can do is hold on to those moments. She smiled, the light in her eyes more genuine than it had ever been. Exactly. And for a brief moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, and everything that had once felt broken and impossible was suddenly whole again. The night felt different. The air was still, but it was heavy, laden with the kind of silence that only comes after a storm has passed. The stars above shone brighter than usual, as if they were trying to tell him something. Or maybe it was just his mind, unraveling slowly as the days ticked by. Aaron sat up in bed, his body aching from the constant pressure of his condition. The exhaustion was starting to feel like a weight around his neck, a chain that grew heavier with each passing hour. Yet, when he looked over at Ifunaya, sitting quietly in the corner, her presence was the only thing that kept him anchored. She had been there all day, never once faltering, never once giving in to the frustration or the fear that gnawed at her. Ifunaya was a constant, a source of calm in a world that felt increasingly unstable. And though Aaron had once prided himself on his ability to face everything alone, now he realized that he didn't want to face it without her. She looked up from the book she had been reading, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that he couldn't quite describe. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Words didn't seem necessary. They had learned, over the past few weeks, that silence could be just as powerful as anything spoken aloud. Aaron shifted slightly, his voice a little hoarse. Ifunaya, why are you still here? The question hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Ifunaya closed the book in her hands and placed it on the nightstand. She walked over to where Aaron sat, kneeling beside him. The weight of her presence was more comforting than any words could ever be. Because I promised you I wouldn't leave, she said softly, her voice unwavering. And because, despite everything, I'm not afraid of being here with you. Even when you're not sure what's coming next. Aaron exhaled, his breath catching in his throat. He didn't know what to say, how to explain the mixture of guilt and gratitude that filled him when she spoke those words. He had always been the one who fixed things, who solved problems. But here, with Ifunaya, he found that maybe the only thing he needed to do was to allow himself to be cared for. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. For everything. For dragging you into this. She shook her head, her fingers gently brushing his. You didn't drag me anywhere. I chose to be here. And I wouldn't have it any other way. For the first time in a long while, Aaron let himself believe her. He wasn't sure what the future held, whether the transplant would come in time, or if his heart would keep beating long enough to find peace. But in that moment, with Ifunaya by his side, he felt something he hadn't in months, hope. The next morning, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. The soft light of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across the room. Aaron was awake earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning. It had been a restless night, filled with thoughts of the transplant, the endless waiting, and what lay beyond. His heart, though still beating, seemed more fragile than ever. Ifunaya entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with breakfast. She placed it on the bedside table before sitting beside him. The scent of freshly brewed tea and warm toast filled the air, but it was the comfort of her presence that drew him in. You didn't have to bring this, Aaron said softly, his voice still thick with sleep. If I didn't, who would? Ifunaya teased gently, her smile brightening the room. Aaron chuckled, though it was strained. You're right. I'd probably forget to eat entirely. She watched him carefully, her fingers brushing over his hand. How are you feeling today? He hesitated, considering the question. There were so many ways to answer it. The truth was, he was tired, exhausted, even. But there was a part of him that was beginning to believe he might just make it. The doctors had warned him that time was running out, but Ifunaya's unwavering support had become a beacon in his life, guiding him through the dark. I'm okay, he said, his words more truthful than he expected. Better than I felt in days. If you say so, Ifunaya replied with a knowing smile. You've been getting stronger every day. Don't think I haven't noticed. Aaron met her gaze, his heart swelling with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. You're a miracle, Ifunaya. She shook her head, her laugh soft and humble. I'm just here, Aaron. I'm just here. As they ate breakfast together, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to lighten, if only for a moment. The constant pressure of his condition, the fear of what lay ahead, all of it faded into the background as they shared this small, intimate moment. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was enough. Later that day, As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the phone rang. It was a call they had been waiting for, one that had the power to change everything. Erin's heart skipped a beat as Ifunaya answered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Erin," she said, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's the hospital. They found a match." The words hung in the air like a prayer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Erin dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. The phone call had come like a flash of lightning in the dark, and for a moment, neither Erin nor Ifunaya could quite grasp the reality of it. The words had hit them with the force of something too large to comprehend: a match. A donor. A second chance. As soon as Ifunaya hung up, she rushed to Erin, her hands shaking slightly as she reached out for him. "Erin, they found a heart. A perfect match." The weight of the moment settled over them. Erin's heart was still struggling, but now there was a lifeline. A glimmer of hope that he had almost forgotten how to believe in. But even as Ifunaya spoke, Erin felt the familiar tightness in his chest, a wave of panic rising. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked, his voice rough. "What if it's not enough? What if?" "Ifunaya," he stopped, swallowing hard as he looked at her. "I don't want to leave you." Her expression softened, and she cupped his face gently in her hands. "You're not going anywhere, Erin. Not yet. Not while I'm here. You're going to fight this. We are going to fight this." Her words were like a bomb to his soul, easing the tension in his body. But even so, the fear remained. It was the same fear he had felt since he first received the diagnosis. The knowledge that time was running out, that every breath could be his last. But now, for the first time in months, he could see something more than just the fear. He saw the possibility of a future. A future with Ifunaya. A future where they could laugh and love without the constant shadow of death hanging over them. "Do you think it's possible?" Erin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That I could get through this? That I could be free again?" Ifunaya's gaze was steady, unwavering. "I believe in you, Erin. And I believe in us." They didn't waste another moment. The doctors had already prepared for the transplant, and all that was left was the long journey to the hospital. Ifunaya stood by his side as they made their way to the car, her hand firmly clutching his. The world outside felt like it was moving in slow motion, as though everything, in every moment, was being drawn out just for them. The drive to the hospital seemed to stretch on forever, the air thick with anticipation and quiet hope. When they finally arrived, Erin felt a knot form in his stomach. The sterile environment of the hospital, the cold, impersonal walls, it was all too familiar. Too much like the place where so many of his worst fears had been born. But Ifunaya's steady presence beside him was the anchor he needed to stay grounded. "Promise me something," he said, his voice low. "If something happens, if..." She silenced him with a soft kiss on his forehead, her eyes filled with unspeakable determination. "Don't talk like that, Erin. You're going to be fine. I'll be here when you wake up. And I'll be here after. Always." He nodded, her words a comfort he clung to. Always. The sterile smell of antiseptic was thick in the air as Ifunaya sat in the waiting room, the ticking of the clock sounding like the pounding of her own heart. She couldn't stop the tremor in her hands, nor the gnawing anxiety that twisted in her stomach. She had been here before, waiting for someone she loved to make it through, but this time was different. It was Erin. And the stakes had never been higher. She stood up and paced, her mind running through every scenario, every possible outcome. The doctors had reassured her that the procedure was routine, that Erin was in good hands. But no amount of comforting words could erase the gnawing fear that clung to her. She had come to know Erin in ways she never imagined. His strength, his vulnerability, his quiet resolve, he had become a part of her life in a way that she couldn't quite describe. She had grown to love him, not just as the man he appeared to be, but as the man he was beneath the surface, broken, scarred, and yet still so incredibly strong. A nurse appeared in the doorway, and Ifunaya's heart leaped in her chest. The nurse smiled kindly, though there was an edge of sympathy in her eyes. "Miss Ifunaya." "Yes, that's me," Ifunaya replied, her voice tight with nervous anticipation. "The procedure has started. It will be a few more hours before we know anything, but for now, you can wait here." Ifunaya nodded, the lump in her throat growing. She returned to her seat, her fingers digging into the arms of the chair as if anchoring herself to something solid. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. Her thoughts swirled around Aaron, his smile, his touch, the quiet conversations they'd had in the quiet moments of their shared life. What if he didn't make it? What if this was the end? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, drop a comment, share with friends and family, and of course, subscribe so you never miss another African folktale story.